How you found the day so far?
I'm enjoying it. I find that quite refreshing that you're all willing to sort of share some ideas, and in a cutthroat industry like professional sport, you wouldn't get your sort of competitors in a room together to sort of helping row the same boat together. So having been a little bit of a farming background with my own family farm, it is good to see this sort of round table discussion happening. So hats off to you, Jordan Horseless, for putting it on, and for everyone for coming along, because I know the older generation would probably have seen this as a good opportunity to put a head gasket on a tractor today, whereas you guys are, taking a day off to come and have a look at other people's farms and share some ideas. So it's good to be part of it.
So we couldn't have got that on the bus tour then?
No, he would have found something to do, but it's just a generational thing, and I was refreshed to see, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but there's a lot more of you that are closer to my age than my dad's age here, and I think that's to do with the changing of the guard in a way, and people in moving on in their own family farms, and then adapting to a lot of the technology that you see out there. And it's not just farming, and there's a lot of industries and things in day-to-day world that have just moved on, and it's good to see that this sector's moving along as well.
You do raise a good point there, Jack, where you say about the demographic that we've got here today and the like, and I think that where I started my career out 10, 15 years ago in this world, and the decision makers then were a bit like roadblocks, where now the people in this room are the decision makers. So it's a lot easier for us to get a lot more traction and seeing the benefits of what we're seeing through using different ag tech, or whether it's precision ag or digital or whatever you want to call it. It's part of that. So yeah.
Yeah, and I guess for those of you that might be wondering who I am.
By the way, do you want to do an introduction, Jack, of yourself?
Yeah, well, so for those of you that may know who I am, I'm involved in motor racing in a professional level in the Supercars Championship as a driver, and also working with Channel 7 on the live broadcasts. But the connection, I guess, with this area and indeed green machines and whatnot is my family's been farming in the Mallee since 1916. So when the great-grandfather got back from World War I, he was given a land title, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with these stories. And now we're fourth-generation farming. We're not as hands-on farmers as you guys, more of a share farming operation, but it was a share farming operation that we wanted to be involved with in a hands-on capacity. So in the last 9 years, I've done 7 harvests with Scotty, who's our share farmer. We've got just under 2,000 acres, and he's got about 3,500 acres. And I started off in harvest kind of looking at the big machines, not having much experience, and then started on the chaser bin and didn't manage to put a scratch on that. So I then got the nod to jump in the harvester for 1 year, and then I think I did 4 straight years in the harvester. So I've got a keen interest in this agriculture sector, and I've got experience doing what you all do. Whilst I haven't had to rely on it to pay my mortgage, it's certainly something that I'm passionate about, and it's got a lot of synergies between professional motorsport and what we can bring to the table for our share farmer is not just an experience and things from a driving point of view, but it's also from mechanical sympathy, preparation. We found that harvest, when we first started, was about getting from breakdown to breakdown, and we've sort of tried to explain to our share farmer that if Bathurst went like that, we probably wouldn't have been very successful. But we're very fortunate in one way that we've got Bathurst that's a 1,000 kilometre race, so it gives us a yardstick for our machinery to run to.
I was just thinking about thinking about things that I've seen with your dad and yourself, and like those mechanical breakdowns must have just done both his head and your head in, because you're going, where's the preparation? Like, why are we having breakdowns? Like, we should just get through this, and there should be the reliability there. And it must have been frustrating especially with the engineering background that you guys have got.
Yeah, well, the worst thing about breaking down on the farm is you've actually got to fix it yourself. Whereas if the race car breaks down, you've got a tribe of mechanics and engineers that kind of fix the problem while we can sit there and have a can of Coke and watch them. So,
I'm just thinking also from when you come up to Mildura and the calls that you'd even made through to Hoyles and talking to Andrew Blair and just like you being under the cab of the header trying to work out if there was a steering issue or things like that and having Blair on the line.
Yeah, one of the worst ones where I'm hoping someone in here had to do this as well, but I had to pull everything out from underneath the cab and get to that front bulkhead that runs across. It had a big crack through it, and I was the youngest, smallest bloke working there, and I had this job of basically being wedged in under there for about 6 hours, trying to remove this bulkhead, and then ringing up the dealership trying to work out how to get the new one in.
You're about the right size for a header mechanic.
Yeah, and that's why I've happily put on a bit of weight in recent years just to steer clear of a few of those jobs. But that's something that really resonated with us, and in particular during COVID time when my family actually moved up to the farm on a more full-time basis as we just had our first baby. We basically took over all of the mechanical preparation. We had our share farmer bring down the 2 headers and all the tractors, chaser bins, and anything with a bearing, anything with engine oil, grease, we serviced the hell out of it so that we could kind of reset the mileage. And I actually haven't been able to bear the fruits of all that because they then changed the date of Bathurst one year to December, so I missed out on harvest. And then we had our second baby in the most recent harvest. So they've been, especially last year when they had the 4-ton lupins crop, I was unfortunate enough to not be there right through to mid-January to finish the harvest. But I think the sales of figures have been quite rewarding.
Hearing your dad on some podcasts, and I think every podcast that I've heard your dad on recent times he mentions he's got like 2,500 tons of lupins. So I feel like he's doing grain marketing on each podcast that he goes on.
I think the figure changes a bit by the sound of it. But
yeah, right.
To be honest, our biggest problem in the harvest last year was our 3 kilometres of dirt road to get to our property was flooded out for the first time in, I think, 50 years. And the Mildura Council have finally come to the party just last week to put some gravel in so we can finally get rid of the rest of the lupins that's sitting in the silo bags on the ground, on the worm bag. So that's, first world problems in this day and age. But it was just such a wet year last year that even some share farmers from sort of the Melbourne district had issues there as well.
Yeah. Which, thinking about how wet it was last year, and thinking about how wet Bathurst was, that must have been absolutely crazy, sort of being up there, practice, and just everyone skidding around. How was that as a driver?
Yeah, well, I mean, Bathurst for us is kind of the holy grail. Not everyone's interested in motorsport, but they'll watch Bathurst. Not everyone's interested in horse racing, but you find yourself watching the Melbourne Cup. And for us, Bathurst is the absolute ultimate. It's what I've put my entire life's efforts and contributions towards. My father was very successful. He won 6 Bathurst 1000s, only sort of behind Peter Brock at 9. And he won 3 with Peter. I haven't won one, but I finished 3rd once, which was a good effort. But last year that you speak of, it was a really weird build-up with a lot of rainfall and a really wet off-circuit. So in the first lap of the race, someone come a cropper off the wet grass and basically took us out of the race. We went 2 laps down, we fixed the damage, we got back going again, got back on the lead lap and finished 10th. So that was a good effort, but it's still not winning.
No.
So this year, Jordan is hopefully shaping up as one of my best opportunities. The young fella that I'm co-driving with is a young fella from Toowoomba by the name of Will Brown. He's driving a Coca-Cola Camaro and he's currently leading the Supercars Championship, so that bodes pretty well for me. They're racing this weekend at Sydney Motorsport Park. I'm not involved in that until Monday. I fly up to Sydney Monday morning. We put a passenger seat in the race car and we take a few of the sponsors for a hot lap. So I'll turn up Monday for that and give a few people a bit of a thrill because doing 265 kilometres an hour in a passenger seat's quite a good ride.
Just thinking about the flights we've got Monday, Lou. I think that you might be dropping into Sydney while going up to Queensland. No, right.
We're saving that for a little Sea Lake demonstration.
Yeah. I was going to say you might get a run around in Macca's buggy then, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, that could be a bit of fun.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that Macca just about had you signed up for as a new header mechanic this morning in the branch. That's why I've been delayed half an hour all day. I think Macca was trying to negotiate, sort of getting Jack involved in the branch or working the branch this morning. So the farm's played a fair role in your life from being a kid right through to now. And how did that sort of like shape who you are now, in a sense?
Yeah, well, for me, it was always the livelihood for the family in a way. I mean, my grandfather was, as Dad would say, not a very good farmer. He was a better mechanic. And like Lou's family, my grandfather was a Chamberlain tractor dealer in Cowangie. And he made a lot more money fixing everyone else's tractors than he did farming. And my grandfather passed away when I was 18, but very much in love with the Mallee region. When he came back from World War II, they dedicated their life to the district. My grandma was part of the CWA, and the surname is well known where we're from, and that doesn't get lost on me. And when my dad was fortunate enough to buy the family farm off of his uncle, around about 20 years ago now, we were involved in an initial share farming arrangement with another neighbour, and then we kind of let it. They didn't want to keep doing it. We let it go for a bit, and it was myself that talked my old man into let's do something here, because at the moment it's a bit of a fire danger. And we were joking that we were letting it go so we could be organic farmers, but the old sunshine harvester certainly needed a bit more than just a wheel bearing, and we ran out of wheat bags at that point.
I was going to say I can't imagine your father as an organic farmer.
No, so so it was a young guy by the name of Scotty Lindener, who's a neighbour and a mate of mine. He's a lot more closer to my age group. He was looking to expand on the land, and I said to him that we want to be a part of it. It's not just a sit in Melbourne, kind of watch what happens sort of deal. We want to be there. We want to see how many trucks leave our property. We want to be involved in the maintenance and driving the headers and being an integral part of it. So if I could make a living there full time, I could see myself being there, but I wouldn't have my wife there because she's very much a bit of a city slicker. But we enjoyed our time there in COVID because we just had a baby, and we decided that we'd get out of Dan Andrews, Melbourne, and kind of set up on the farm. Like I said, we were able to do a lot of work in that period, and then we've now settled in Gisborne, just out of Melbourne, on 10 acres. So I'm waiting for Jordan to set up the auto steer on my little 1440 Series 2 ride-on.
I'm just waiting for the enduro season to be over so we can do the video.
Yeah, well, we're looking forward to that. But in terms of the way I see also the correlation between what's happening in ag at the moment in terms of this data and technology, it's very similar in a way to what we do with our car racing, because when I drive my racing car, there's a series of engineers that collate all the data from when I'm driving. And 30 years ago, you'd have two guys jump in one of these buggies, for example, cut a lap around a racetrack and just look at the stopwatch. One person would be faster, one would be slower. Now they tell you who's faster and slower at every single corner and how they're doing it. So they measure where we jump on the brake pedal, which is equally matched with when we jump off the throttle, how much brake pressure we use. So we can use up to 1,200 pounds of brake pressure. So that's nearly 300 kilos of brake force you're pushing through your leg. Then they monitor how quickly you've turned the steering wheel, how fast you've entered the corner, how quick you then get on the throttle, how fast you get out of the corner. And you go to Bathurst, there's 22 corners. So think about the data that you're gaining over one lap. And when we're looking at a racetrack like Sydney Motorsport Park this weekend, the pole lap will be 1 minute 30, and the person who's last will be 1 minute 31. That's 1 second over, I think the circuit length there is around about 3 kilometres. So 3 kilometres once, that's around about 7 metres, I think, if my calculations, maybe 8 metres. So from here to the end of the wall there is the difference between the person qualifying on pole and the one that's qualifying on last. And that's incredibly close.
Oh, even compared to when looking at lap times, well, leads into another question I've got is the changes in technology or the biggest changes you've seen in racing and in farming over the last 20, 30 years. lap times now being, you throw a blanket over, you've got the whole field compared to maybe 3 seconds, or you got those real stragglers, or even hearing about sort of the story of, I think Mark Scape's first Bathurst, that his co-driver wasn't going to make qualifying, so Mark put his race suit on and went qualified for his co-driver because he couldn't actually get in that, is it 120% or whatever the range is for that lap. So in a sense, what are the changes you've seen in racing and technology or racing and farming over the last 20 years, Jack?
Yeah, well, the racing thing has definitely been sort of the ability to acquire the data from the car and basically keep the drivers very accountable. And it's probably a lot more accountable in Formula One because the drivers get paid a hell of a lot more money and the engineers are about 10 times the amount that we have in Australia. And it's just everyone's got massive accountability on what their role is within the race team. So, you know, when my dad was racing and some of the other household names, Dick Johnson, Alan Moffat, you know, they used to joke about having cigarettes in the glove box of the car and all this sort of stuff. Now I can tell you we don't have cigarettes in the glove box of these race cars. You know, we are so probably underestimated with what we do. I was just chatting with a couple of people before. You know, in a supercar, the cabin temperatures are around about 20, 25 degrees on ambient. So people go, geez, why don't you have an air conditioner? Well, we don't have any sort of temperature control, any of the insulation or anything. The engine's operating at 100 degrees, the exhaust are 260 degrees, and you're about, well, from here to, the engine's here and you're sitting there, and the hottest thing is actually the brake pedal and the throttle pedal, which could be 100 degrees. But why I bring it up the cabin temperature is you're wearing 3 layers of fireproof clothing and you're losing between 2 and 3 kilos of body fluid an hour. So we've got to be very fit drivers. So that then comes back to the accountability with the data acquisition. So in answering your question in one thing, I think it's certainly the way that the cars have been built, but all of that comes from the data that they're able to collect to then manufacture them better and manufacture them faster. Then in farming, I can kind of relate to what Kempy was saying about how you can be very satisfied with the auto steer. Yeah. Because I can remember some of the old guys, like my grandpa's friends, talking about this auto steer. And we've still got an old cocky just up the road who runs about a 12-foot comb on an old case and still manual steers on the curve because he doesn't want to try the new technology. But I can just see how that technology has then been advanced to, you know, we still on our farm cut in the boundaries on manual steer. Yep. So you can see how we've got room to improve in our farm.
So you're about to get some verge on that one.
But yeah, I like the look of the verge. But I think what it lends to in this industry is the steps towards autonomy.
Yep.
And I'm hoping that doesn't get into motor racing because drivers like me would be out of a job. But I think it's exciting times for this industry because it's just, as an owner, you know, not many of the race car drivers actually own any of the equipment. So they arguably couldn't give a stuff about wear and tear, crash damage. But when you guys own all your machinery, the less you can use it.
You care.
Yeah, and the less you can use it for more efficiency or more effectiveness at lower cost to the operator, it's a no-brainer, isn't it?
100%.
Things like, you know, the amount of times I've driven the header and had to come back and grab a couple of mohawks that I've missed of, you know, a single line. Yeah. Well, think about how much, not just diesel cost, it's wear and tear, and then effectively it's maintenance.
Yeah, yep. And thinking about running or doing that last strip, and you don't actually have the whole harvester full, so it's not working to its full potential. It's and it does cause wear and tear. So
being an owner and a race car driver, and your passion is racing.
I thought you were talking about yourself then.
So being an owner and passionate race car driver, but you also have to switch to managing, looking after the data. That's seems to be nearly the most important thing. What strategies do you bring into play to transition from the operator to the data analysis? Because with farming, there's initially a lot of farmers see this big black wall of data and they look at it, but they just want to go and drive the tractor. So what strategies do you bring into play where you transition from the operator back to the data analysis?
Yeah, and sometimes even when I get in the harvester, I see all the display and everything, and it's a little bit overwhelming. And some of the data can give me a similar feeling, but I guess for me it actually still starts with like analog recording. So when I'm still, and during the week I run an engineering business where I restore old race cars and old road cars, and where I'm heading with that is whenever I warm up a race engine, they're high performance engines, it triggers your brain with everything, but it gets warmed up to a water temperature of 80 degrees. I always have a look and see what the engine oil temperature is. So at that point, it might only be 50 degrees. But if you did it again next week and it was 60 degrees, you've got to ask yourself what's causing that to then go up. So for me, it's little triggers in operating windows of performance. And from a race car point of view, I can feel every vibration. I can hear when the engine's off song. I can feel from the power output when a spark plug goes kapoof. And then what the data actually allows you to do is record all that, and you're effectively recording trends and giving yourself datum and reference points to do something with it. Now, whether that's improvement, whether it's saving the engine from blowing up or saving your machine from catastrophic failure, or indeed just operating it at a better temperature or at a more efficient manner, using all of the values that the data can record gives you this enormous array of information to only benefit the sort of end goal of why you're an owner of something, to be completely honest. And I see it with a lot of the farmers. They're actually quite in tune with their machinery. They don't really know it, but they actually are second to none with what's happening with their machinery. And a lot of that then doesn't filter through to the young kids that don't have mechanical sympathy, but then it's also a byproduct of the data being too good, because they've become values, and they don't know that 102 degrees on the engine actually means it's over boiling point, and that could be a drama.
Yeah,
you see? So sometimes you've got to make sure that you're not just processing numbers as values, and you've got to understand what they are. But certainly for us in the racing world, between the data engineer, the engineer and the driver, all of the data becomes an accurate measurement of the trends, right? So it's the driver input, what the machinery is doing, and then it's very similar, I've noticed, with what we do in harvest time. And especially when I like to look at the yield maps. And I had to laugh today. A few of the guys said when we got out north of Sea Lake, it was quite hilly. You obviously haven't been out a bit further to our place, because we get bogged in the dry sand out at our farm, because it's quite a lot hillier and quite a lot sandier. But you sort of you've got to use that data to your advantage, further to your point, and kind of understand what you want from it, and it can quite often provide you with a lot of answers, not just about the mechanical side of it, but how you can improve, especially on the farm, certainly some efficiencies and things like that.
So thinking about operating machines and what data we are getting off farm machine, off the equipment now. Thinking about Harvest Advisor and actually having the cameras in the machine, and having people say, "Oh, I can operate the machine better than what that can," and actually setting that machine to run at 95% all day, compared to you as an operator that you're on your phone, you're making decisions, your mind's wandering. I am really interested at harvest time to show you those figures and really dig into that, Jack. I reckon it'll be really interesting.
Yeah, my mind's really open to it, and I know that Al, Scotty, who I farm with, is as well. I can relate as well when we're talking about, I think it was Kempy as well, saying, when you had to duck off and the uncle's on the thing, and you can, hey, check out where you're at, because I've been in that position where, Scotty's had to whip up to grab some parts or whatever, and the thought of changing paddocks when I first started was just like it was a bit.
It's a bit daunting, and and coming back to that driver or operator education, just to make you feel comfortable. Like you stick me in your car now, I'll be able to go, righto, well, I'm sure that I can drive it forward, but I'm not going to drive it nearly as well as what you will. but like actually telling me what things can do in the training, like you start to feel more comfortable in your surrounds.
Yeah, and then I guess it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because experience then gives you the confidence, but it also, in this situation, leans towards resistance to change. And
That's a good point.
you're very comfortable what you're doing, and you don't want to lose too much time kind of learning new ways, and that's at the detriment, I suppose, to the technology.
Well, being open-minded, well, if everyone in this room wasn't open-minded, they wouldn't be here today. So that's probably that's probably a good statement about just being open-minded and willing to continue the continuous learning.
And then when you touched on sort of how hard you're pushing the machinery, one of the biggest things to bring back to some experience I've learned from motor racing is when we go to Bathurst, there's quite often times when we need to save fuel. And you might think to yourself, why would you want to save petrol? But let's just put it in simple terms. At Bathurst, our fuel tank may do 30 laps, as an example. That's not the true data, but I'm just saying as a round number. So we've got 30 laps and we need petrol. If there's 33 laps to go in the race, what do? Would you come in and pit? And don't ask Jamie Whincup, that's not a good one. But and then you've got to go, right, how am I going to actually make this car do 33 laps instead of 30? And your brain's telling you you're not going to make it to the finish. But we've learned over the years that in practice you need to practice saving fuel. So the old method used to be, don't let it rev out to 7,500 RPM, short shift. But we've actually calculated that doesn't save you any petrol, because the way the modern engines work is when you're flat out on the throttle, the engine's pumping in full throttle fuel regardless of the engine RPM. Yeah. So we come up with this lift and coast method. So you drive up the hill at Bathurst, you get to the top of the hill, you come off to about 65% throttle, and you coast down the hill while still not losing a lot of acceleration, but then it enables you to brake deeper into the corner, and overall you could save nearly 0.8 of a litre per lap without losing a heck of amount of lap time. So for us then we work out ways to,
and again that's manipulating data. That's your intuition. That's always feeding back to go, I've got to get to this point. How am I going to get to, or this is the result, how do I get that result?
Yeah, and we have little games like that in Harvest where I can see the fuel trailer coming in and my fuel lights are on, and I'm like, I've got to be further, and work out ways that I could use less throttle on a turnaround and all that sort of stuff, and try and really maximise your mileage. But it's just always ways your brain's thinking about, kind of in farming sense, it's you're effectively saving money if you use less fuel. And in motor racing terms, you might be able to win Bathurst by saving more fuel. So there's sort of these weird little comparisons there that I certainly draw upon. It's not just our industry, but there's certainly little things you can always draw upon in life.
And even going back to how Jack got here today, like through social media, seeing how involved you've been on the farm, and that really drew me into following you. Also the COVID with doing the restorations on the cars, and it's through just social media that Jack's actually here today, because I think Mark Redder might have been wearing one of your hats, and I just made a comment saying, "Oh, that's a cool hat. How'd I get one?" And Jack sends me the link to buy one. So I did pay for it, so it's all right. But yeah, then I just started sort of saying who we are, and knowing Jack's interest in farming, I just thought that if he was open to being here today, then I thought it'd be really interesting to have you here.
Yeah, no, I thank you for reaching out to me. I've always been to a few of these field days and things with other motor racing type sponsors, and I kind of enjoy talking to a lot of the farmers. Like, you're all like-minded, and we can always chat about anything and everything, and it's good to resonate with people from the land, but it's also good to work with people like yourself, Jordan, and the wider Horsler community have welcomed me in. So I enjoy hoping there's more of this stuff along the way. Yep. It's a shame we're not doing the speed field days, but that's another topic.
I was going to say that. I was going to say I like clashes with you being in Sydney next week, but hopefully it doesn't clash next year, and we'll definitely be doing a lot more in the future. So the plan is to have Jack as the brand ambassador going forward into the future. So you'll be seeing a lot more Jack around the Hoyser Group, our events, marketing, podcast.
Hopefully driving machinery. That's really what I want to do.
I,
Test driver.
I sold the whole relationship with Jack that you'll get to drive an X9. So
I've heard some of these new harvesters have got massage chairs, so I'm pretty keen to see what they're all about.
yeah, I think you might be struggling to get a massage chair for Bathurst this year.
No.
Has anyone got any questions for Jack or that they want to ask about anything?
So, with the data management, so like we've got the operations centre where we overlay all applications, seating, everything, all that data. Do you guys have the same in motor racing, where from an event, all that data goes to a central depository where you can overlay and look at different data throughout the year?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Each team is kind of the owner of their own data. So the teams have their own data, which is brake pressures, throttle position sensors, wheel speeds, all the temperatures, engines, gearboxes, drive lines. That data is recorded by the team, and it's really only relevant circuit to circuit, unless, like I mentioned, you've seen a temperature discrepancy. But typically you're using the data, we've got potentiometers on the shock absorbers so that you can watch each individual suspension movement through the corners and whatnot. So it's typically a year-on-year circuit-to-circuit log. But it's very timely that you bring this up because for those that follow the supercars quite closely, this year there's some issues with the parity between the Ford and the Chev. So we're a formula that the technical rules are supposed to allow both cars to be of equal performance. This year they've changed to new cars and there's a discrepancy between the engines and the aerodynamics without getting too technical. But what supercars are actually in control of is everyone's data. And the way they measure the parity is they grab the 6 fastest Fords and the 6 fastest Holdens and they do marry it all into one. And they start to look at what I spoke about before, the trends. So after Darwin, when they triggered the parity, which was only last month, they noticed that the Ford was quicker down the straight than the Camaro, which doesn't make sense because it was slower. But they noticed that when the cars were turning into the corner, the Fords were using more steering activity, meaning the car had a lot less grip on the entry, whereas the Chev was a lot more balanced. So they use that data, then work out how they can make them more comparable. And they went to Townsville and they gave the Fords more rear downforce to try and settle the cars down on entry to smoothen up the steering. And then they tried to bring the engines back to normal, so they kind of reset the datum. So the collection of the data in this instance is used for sporting regulations to try and regulate the quality of the show so that anyone can kind of win the motor race. But generally the data between teams is very secret. If I was able to get a copy of your data, I'd be sort of getting a ticket to the Holy Grail, because you see how the driver like Shane Van Gisbergen, everyone wants to know, hey, where's he jumping on the brakes? How does he manage the car out of the corner? So it's kind of like, like the Holy Grail in terms of how a driver and a team extract the speed out of the car.
It's a bit like, I think about, I'll use the example of karting for me, and you don't know how you're going in practice or race meet until you get qualifying and you start seeing the guys and girls in your class and what lap times they're doing, and you go, oh, hang on, I thought I was up here, where actually I'm down here, so, which I was probably down there more often than not, but yeah.
And in other forms of motorsport, again, not to bore you too much, but in Porsche racing, for example, all the Porsches are the same, but there's a lot of gentleman drivers, so there's a lot of males and females that are kind of successful businessmen that are just there to go and drive a race car on weekends instead of going fishing on a boat. That's sort of what they're doing with their money. But they don't have good data to look at unless they go and buy it off another driver. So you'll see a lot of drivers kind of in those different categories. That's not a true professional sport. They can sell their data, and then
it's a bit more like working with farmers in a sense that are willing to help one another to improve. In a roundabout way.
In some sense, because you're not, the young kid that's winning the Porsche race that has ambitions to go to Formula One he's not worried about this 65-year-old wealthy businessman that's 6 seconds slower. He's no threat to him.
No.
This guy wants to know how to go as fast as this one, which is probably about 40 years reasons why he would never be as quick. But effectively, they can use that data to try and improve as a driver, which happens quite a lot in the sort of less professional ranks.
Yep. Any other questions out there? I'm sure you got a question for Jack. You've had questions all day.
Two things. Formula One, you've mentioned a couple of times. So, why is that a dream to get there? And then two, do you like that the V8 supercars are regulated to make closer racing, or would you prefer it to go like Formula One, where it's who's got the biggest bank account, cheaper data?
Yeah, they're two good questions. Every kid that kind of starts in go-karting and has an interest in motor racing kind of wants to get to Formula One, but it's a tough slog, especially from Australia. And I was telling the guys in my bus today, back in 2005, I raced a kid in Formula Ford called Daniel Ricciardo, and I flogged him. Does that mean I'm better than Daniel Ricciardo? No, it doesn't, but he set his sights on going over to Europe, and he had some people that helped invest in him to get over there, and he made it all the way to Formula One, and thoroughly deserved it. He's a good driver. But I never had an opportunity to kind of get over to Europe. I might have got 10,000 Australian dollars to go over to get a test drive, but you needed 30,000 quid to test a car and those sorts of things. So Formula One for Australian and New Zealand kids, it's very challenging because a lot of the sponsors are European and American wider audiences. Who the hell is this kid from Australia? We don't sell much of our product there, so bad luck sort of thing. And equally, the Australian supercars, you can make a pretty good living. I'm living proof of that. I'm not a gazillionaire, but there's plenty of kids that have done better than me that are winning the championships in Australia, making a very good living as a professional sportsman. So you get to that point at some stage in your career where you've got to pick a direction. And a lot of people, motorsport's one of those sports where money has to create the first opportunity. If you're a gun runner or a golfer or a cricketer or a football player, talent will give you your first opportunity because your talent will rise above everyone else's. But in motorsport, to go and drive a race car, you have to go pay for it. Someone's got to pay for the tyres, the fuel. You go to the Winton racetrack, it's $5,000 to rent the track for a day. So money creates opportunity. And then the second part of your question was about supercars, sort of more equalised in its competition. I like that because it brings the best drivers to the front, and it also brings the best teams to the front. But the biggest thing equally, which is the first problem, is that motor racing is expensive. You've got to make sure that it's not the rich get richer. You've got to have a category where people could still have a lower level budget and still perform as well. Like in Formula One, if you don't have the money, you're not going to be anywhere near the front of the field. And if we still had cigarette sponsorship, for example, we'd probably all be better off because there was a lot of money in motor racing and world sport generated from that. And, I guess energy drinks is a current version of that for us with your Red Bulls and Monsters and those things. So we've also always got to remember that we're an entertainment business, especially in supercars. So if we're going to spend $2 million on something that we only need to spend $1 million on to create a good show for everyone to watch, we probably need to look at the cheaper alternative.
So even just thinking about the history of supercars and where that's come from and looking at Group C through to Group A, then the evolution of V8 supercars there. So very much thinking about the 70s, the 80s, the Moffats, the Brocks, they dominated. Moving into the Group A era, Godzilla, Fred Gibson and the like Mark Scaife, Jim Richards really dominated that. And then into the supercars, like you'd added a big part of bringing parity into the sport, didn't you?
Yeah, well, it probably
in that realm at the time.
Yeah, and without getting too technical in the conversation, racing has always been about go race cars on Sunday and then try and sell them on Monday, and that really resonated well with Holden and Ford for many years. In the 80s, for example, unfortunately, the category was in an interesting position because it kind of adopted some world rules, which then kind of brought in turbocharged cars and BMWs and Nissan Skylines. But the other problem was Peter Brock and Alan Moffat were the only two people getting paid by the promoters to go car racing. And guys like my dad and Dick Johnson and the people that weren't getting paid said, well, you guys can pay those two blokes, but good luck watching a race with two blokes going around, because motor racing still needs someone to finish 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th down to 20th. So they started a thing called the Touring Car Entrance Group of Association, and they, instead of paying two people, they put all the money into one bucket of honey, and then everyone got an equal distribution of the honey. And ultimately, that's now 30 years on, why the sport still has 25 cars on the grid, because there's no unequal opportunities in that respect. There's no prize money, which I was telling some of the guys about in my bus today. All the prize money got tipped into the entry appearance money, because again, the people that were winning all the races, taking home all the prize money, realised there wouldn't have been a race or prize money without the next person that finished second. So that opportunity, and it's, to be honest, it's an Australian success story, because it's a business that is probably ranked 3rd or 4th to AFL, NRL cricket. Yep. It runs nearly in every state and territory in Australia all year round. It has an enormous amount of jobs. I think it's something like 2,500 people work in the industry, and it's a profitable business. So it is an Australian business success story that started with a few blokes that had race cars in a shed like this without any bloody concrete floors, pushing their cars on a trailer and going racing. Yep. And now it's a world-class product.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on the DRS system they run in Formula One? Could you see that working in supercars?
For those that don't watch Formula One, they have a big rear wing, and wings on race cars work the opposite to an aeroplane. So a rear wing on an aeroplane helps it fly, and a rear wing on a race car sticks it to the ground, helps it go faster around the corners. And then in Formula One, they kind of flatline the wing so that it stops creating downforce, but gives the car a lot of straight line speed to help promote passing. It works really well in Formula One because their cars generate something like 100 tonne of downforce, and then the drag goes quicker. But in supercars, it wouldn't be as effective because they only create about 60 kilos of downforce off the wing. So we already run the wings as sort of flat as we can. So unless they could kind of eliminate the wing, like drop it in the boot and pop it back up, it wouldn't give us the straight line speed advantage that would give us enough to pass someone. But they've sampled different ways to try and encourage it, but it's hard with our cars because we're kind of right on the edge of performance in every which way we look. So unfortunately, we're always a victim of our own success, because in motor racing, we qualify with the fastest car at the front, and then they get slower to the slowest car at the back, and then we complain there's no passing. Well, there shouldn't be. Like, it doesn't make sense, because would you watch the 100-metre athletics race if Usain Bolt started one grid position in front of everyone? And this is what I talk like. I'm bagging my own sport here.
But that's a fair comment to make.
So the best way we can promote racing is reverse the grids, have qualifying, then let the fastest guy come off the back and see how far he can get.
But then you'll be worrying about sandbagging, and everyone's sort of just trying to be last.
Well, that's So maybe they need to do it like a chook lotto.
Go. Actually, speaking of that, I did actually put some cans of Coke or cans of soft drink under the seat. So just have a look under whoever's got actually a can under their seat. You just put your hand up, or hands.
Someone's lucky or unlucky here.
Or who's closest to the can? Who's close to the pin?
Someone can claim this one.
It's not the fact that you got a free drink. It's actually the fact that I'm giving away a weather station to the close, or to whoever's got the can closest to them. So that's been donated by Sam Ayres from Metos ANZ. So you've got yourself No worries.
We're not giving these ones away?
No, I've got to send them out in the paddock. But, yep.
Well, we're still too close to the time of the event to give it a true account of what happened. What happened when the old man test drove Rocky's VK up Tullamarine Freeway?
It's a nighttime story, but it's not today, and Dad tells the story better than me.
What about the story when he took the XU1 to like the Odeon dance and did donuts and took joyrides for the locals? Was that, do you know about that one? Or
I've heard many stories about Dad.
he's really just a bush legend. Like, he's just a bush legend that went to Formula One and raced, and now he's back on the farm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the bush dance one, but I know he's done Cowangi to Melbourne in about 45 minutes, so that's pretty good going. But yeah, some of those stories you'd have to ask him.
Yeah. Are there any stories that you can divulge about yourself, Jack? That
Not at this stage.
No.
I'm too young to go to jail.
No worries. Well, we'll wrap it up there. That's the formal part of today, done and dusted. I really want to thank you, Jack, for coming along. It's been great to have you involved in the day and everything leading up to it, and the interaction that you've had with the growers. I think everyone that's interacted with you's really enjoyed today. So, round of applause for Jack.
Thank you.
I do want to thank my team, Matt, Govey, Reese. Thank you for the efforts for helping with today and putting it on, because it's a big job, and it's been made a lot easier by many hands make light work. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your efforts. So that we'll finish. We'll wrap it up there. There's beers in the fridge, so help yourself. And we'll basically now is just to have a social drink and chat with one another. So thanks for your time today, and look forward to having a chat.